What is the creepiest or most unexplained thing that has happened to you that you still think about to this day? I lived alone in a studio apartment for 2 years, and during that time, I started noticing weird things. Nothing major at first, just small stuff, like my keys being in a different spot than where I left them, or the TV being on a different channel when I got home from work. I chalked it up to being forgetful or tired, but then things escalated. I started finding long, dark hairs on my pillow and in my bathroom sink. The thing is, I have short blonde hair. I told myself maybe they were from the previous tenant or something, even though I deep cleaned the entire apartment when I moved in. Then one day, I came home from work, and there was a smell in my apartment. Perfume, strong, floral, and definitely not anything I owned. I checked every room, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, the smell lingered for hours. That night, I couldn't sleep. I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I got up to get some water, and when I walked past my bathroom, I saw the mirror was fogged up, like someone had just taken a hot shower. But I hadn't showered, and the mirror had been clear when I passed it 5 minutes earlier. I wiped the fog away, and written in the condensation were the words, "I live here too." I grabbed my phone and called the police immediately. They searched my entire apartment, including the crawl space, and found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been there. They suggested I install a camera, so I did. I set up a hidden camera pointing toward my living room and kitchen area. The next day, I checked the footage. What I saw made me physically sick. The video showed me coming home from work, doing my normal routine, making dinner, watching TV, and going to bed around 11. But at 1:30 in the morning, a woman emerged from my closet. She had long dark hair and was wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 70s. She walked around my apartment, touching my things, eating food from my fridge, and sitting on my couch, while watching me sleep. She did this for almost 2 hours before going back into the closet. I called the police again, and this time they took it seriously. They opened my closet and found a small opening in the back wall that led to a crawl space between my apartment and the one next door. Inside the crawl space, they found a makeshift living area, blankets, a pillow, food wrappers, and photos of me sleeping. The woman was arrested the next day. She had been living in the walls of the building for over 3 years, moving between apartments through the crawl spaces. She had a history of mental illness and had been reported missing by her family 2 years earlier. I moved out immediately, and to this day, I still can't sleep without checking every closet and every corner of whatever room I'm in. When I was 12, I went to a sleepover at my friend Jessica's house. It was me, Jessica, and 2 other girls. We were watching movies, eating junk food, just having a great time. Around midnight, Jessica's parents went to bed and told us to keep the noise down. We decided to play truth or dare, and Jessica dared me to go down to the basement alone and bring back a specific book from the bookshelf. The basement was unfinished, concrete floors, exposed beams, and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I didn't want to look scared, so I agreed. I went downstairs and found the bookshelf in the corner. I was looking for the book when I heard breathing behind me. I spun around, and there was a little boy standing at the bottom of the stairs. He looked about 7 years old, wearing pajamas, and he was staring at me with this blank expression. I said, "Hi, are you Jessica's brother?" She'd never mentioned having one, but I figured maybe he lived with their dad or something. The boy didn't respond. He just kept staring at me. I asked, "Are you okay?" He slowly raised his hand and pointed at me. Then he opened his mouth, and this horrible sound came out. It was like screaming and crying at the same time. I ran past him up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. I was hyperventilating, and the other girls asked what was wrong. I said, "There's a little boy down there. Who is he?" Jessica looked confused and said, "What little boy?" I said, "Your brother or whoever he is, the kid in the basement." Jessica's face went pale. She said, "I don't have a brother." I told her what I saw, and she started crying. She said, "We need to leave, right now." We woke up her parents and told them what happened. Her dad went down to the basement with a baseball bat, but there was nobody there. Jessica's mum sat us down and explained that before they bought the house, another family had lived there, and their 7-year-old son had died in the basement. He'd been playing down there and somehow got trapped inside an old freezer and suffocated. They found him 3 days later. Jessica's parents had never told her because they didn't want to scare her. I never went back to that house, and Jessica said that after that night, she would sometimes hear a child crying in the basement. They moved out a year later. My sister and I shared a room growing up. When she was 5 and I was 8, she started talking about her friend Sarah. She said Sarah visited her at night and played with her. My parents assumed it was just an imaginary friend, pretty typical for her age, but something felt different. I could hear them at night. I would wake up to whispering and giggling, and when I looked over at my sister's bed, she'd be sitting up, talking to empty air. One night, I asked her who she was talking to. She said, "Sarah, duh." I said, "There's no one there," and she pointed to the corner of the room. "She's right there, can't you see her?" I looked at the corner, and I swear I saw something. A shadow darker than the rest of the room, and it was moving. My sister said, "Sarah wants to know if you want to play with us." I said no, and pulled the covers over my head. The next morning, I told my parents. They dismissed it, but my mum started asking my sister more questions. My sister said Sarah was 7 years old and used to live in our house, but she couldn't leave. She said Sarah was sad because she missed her mommy and was looking for her. My mum's face went pale. She asked what Sarah looked like. My sister described a girl with long blonde hair wearing a white nightgown. My mum called my dad into the room. They whispered for a minute, and then my dad went down to the basement. He came back with an old newspaper clipping. The previous family who lived in our house had a 7-year-old daughter named Sarah who disappeared in the middle of the night. She had walked out of the house in her nightgown and never returned. They searched for months and never found her. The family eventually moved away. My parents asked my sister if Sarah had told her what happened. My sister said Sarah went looking for something in the woods behind the house. She got lost. It was dark, she was scared, and she couldn't find her way back. My sister said Sarah had been trying to find her way home ever since. My parents called the police and told them everything. They searched the woods behind our house and found remains under leaves and debris. They identified them as Sarah through dental records. She had been missing for 15 years. My sister stopped talking about Sarah after that. She said Sarah came to say goodbye and thank her, and that she was going home now. I'm 32 now, and my sister is 29. We still bring it up sometimes. She doesn't remember much, just that Sarah was her friend, and then one day she wasn't there anymore. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at a call center. There was this co-worker named David who sat in the cubicle next to mine. We weren't friends, but we talked a lot. Random stuff about work, sports, whatever helped get through the day. One morning, David didn't show up. That was weird because he never missed a shift. People asked around. Nobody knew anything. Our manager tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. 3 days passed, still no David. No texts, no emails, nothing. On the 4th day, I walked into the office, and David was sitting at his desk like he'd been there the whole time. I walked over and said, "Dude, where have you been? Everyone's been worried." He looked at me like I was the crazy one and said, "What are you talking about? I was here yesterday." I told him, "No, you've been gone for 3 days." He insisted he'd been at work every single day. He even brought up a conversation we'd allegedly had the day before about a call he'd taken. I told him that conversation happened 4 days earlier, the last day any of us saw him. He got upset, genuinely distressed. He said he didn't understand what was happening, that he remembered coming to work, remembered talking to people, remembered taking calls. He described entire days that none of us had lived through. Other co-workers confirmed he'd been missing. Our manager pulled him into the office to talk. After a while, David came out looking shaken. He said he didn't know where he'd been. His memory just didn't match reality. The manager told him to take the rest of the day off. David left. I never saw him again. He didn't come back to work. His phone was disconnected. Someone went by his apartment and it was empty, completely cleared out, like he'd never lived there. We tried to look him up on social media, but his accounts were gone. His email stopped working. Even the emails he'd sent me at work, the ones I still had in my inbox, were suddenly blank when I opened them. The creepiest part? The company had no employment records for him. None. Our manager said there was no employee named David and that I must be mixing him up with someone else. But I'm not. I worked next to him for 6 months. I can still picture his voice, his laugh, his stupid jokes, the lunches we had together. And yet it's like he was erased from existence, and I'm the only one left who remembers he was ever there. When I was 8 years old, I had an imaginary friend named Thomas. He was my constant companion. I talked to him, played with him, and my parents thought it was cute. They even played along, asking Thomas questions, setting an extra place at the table for him. This went on for about 6 months, until one day Thomas told me something that changed everything. I was playing in my room when Thomas said, "I need to tell you something. I'm not supposed to be here." I asked what he meant, and he said, "I was supposed to grow up, but I didn't. Something bad happened, and I've been stuck ever since." I asked him what happened. He said, "There was a fire. I was scared. I couldn't get out. I called for my mom, but she didn't come." I didn't really understand what he meant, but it terrified me. I ran downstairs and told my mom what Thomas had said. She laughed it off and said I just had a very creative imagination. But that night, I heard my parents arguing in their room. I crept down the hall and listened. My mom was saying, "We need to tell her. She's going to find out eventually." And my dad said, "No, she's too young. She doesn't need to know yet." The next morning, I asked my mum what they were talking about. She looked like she had seen a ghost. She sat me down and told me that before I was born, they had a son named Thomas. He died in a house fire when he was 4 years old. They never told me about him because they didn't want me growing up in his shadow. I felt sick. I asked what he looked like, and she showed me a photo. The boy in the picture looked exactly like the Thomas I'd been playing with. Same red hair, same freckles, same smile. I never saw Thomas again after that day. My parents said it was because I found out the truth, and my mind couldn't keep the illusion going. But I don't think it was an illusion. I think my brother really was there, and he stayed as long as he could until he had to leave. My mom died when I was 16, and about a week after the funeral, I was alone in the house going through some of her things. I was in her bedroom, looking through her jewelry box, when I found a letter addressed to me in her handwriting. The envelope was sealed, and it looked old. The paper was yellowed. I opened it and started reading. It said, "My dearest son, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone, and you found this letter like I knew you would. I need to tell you something I never had the courage to say in person. You are not my first son. I had another son before you. His name was Michael, and he died when he was 3 years old. It was an accident. He drowned in our pool. I blamed myself every day after that happened. Your father and I moved to a different state to start over, and then you were born. You look exactly like him. Same eyes, same smile. Sometimes when I look at you, I see him, and it breaks my heart all over again. I know this must be confusing and painful to read, but I wanted you to know the truth. I love you more than anything in this world, and I'm so sorry I never told you." I sat there staring at the letter in complete shock. My dad had never mentioned anything about a brother, or a previous son, or any of this. I went downstairs to call him and confront him, but when I got to the living room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a photo album on the coffee table that hadn't been there before. I opened it, and it was full of pictures of a little boy who looked exactly like me. Same face, same hair, everything. The photos were dated in the early 90s, before I was born. On the last page, there was a newspaper clipping about a 3-year-old boy named Michael who had drowned in a backyard pool. I called my dad immediately, and he broke down crying. He confirmed everything in the letter. He said my mum had never gotten over Michael's death and had kept all of his things hidden away. He said he thought the letter had been thrown away years ago, but somehow it had ended up in her jewelry box. The part that still haunts me is this. I have these vague memories from when I was very young, of my mum calling me Michael. I always thought I'd misheard her, but now I wonder if she ever really saw me as my own person. or if I was just a replacement for the son she lost. I worked as a paramedic for 5 years, and most of what you see eventually gets filed away somewhere in the back of your mind. But there's one call I still think about all the time. We got dispatched to check on an elderly man who'd fallen in his home and couldn't get up. When we arrived, the front door was unlocked, so we let ourselves in and called out to him. We found him lying on the living room floor next to his recliner, awake, alert, and in surprisingly good shape considering the fall. While we were assessing him, he kept smiling past my shoulder toward the hallway. I asked him what he was looking at, and he said, "My wife is here. She's been taking care of me." My partner and I exchanged a glance. We figured he might be confused or had hit his head. He pointed at an empty spot in the hallway and said, "Her name is Dorothy. She's standing right there." I didn't argue. I just said something like, "I'm glad she's here." We got him on the stretcher and started loading him into the ambulance. As I was securing him, he suddenly grabbed my arm and said, "She wants me to tell you something." I told him to go ahead. He said, "She says your father is proud of you, and he's sorry he never said it when he was alive." Every hair on my body stood up. My father had died 6 months earlier. Our relationship had been complicated, and the fact that he'd never told me he was proud of me was something that still ate at me. I asked the man how he knew that, and he said, "I don't. Dorothy told me." We transported him to the hospital, and afterward I tried to laugh it off as some weird coincidence. But it stuck with me. I mentioned his wife Dorothy to the nurse while giving report. The nurse frowned and said, "His wife Dorothy died 20 years ago." I went back to his room to talk to him again, but he didn't remember any of it. He didn't remember talking about Dorothy, didn't remember saying anything about my father. He said everything after the fall was kind of a blur. I never got an explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the man was confused, but it was too specific, too personal, and too perfectly timed to just shrug away. And it still hits me the same way every time I think about it. I used to work as a nanny for a family with 2 kids, a 6-year-old girl named Sophie and a 3-year-old boy named Max. One afternoon, we were playing in the living room when Sophie suddenly froze and said, "Miss Sarah, who's that man?" I looked around and said, "What man, sweetie?" She pointed to the corner of the room. "That man, he's standing right there watching us." I followed her finger, but the corner was completely empty. I said, "There's no one there, honey." She insisted, "Yes, there is. He's tall and he has a black coat and he's smiling, but it's not a nice smile." Max immediately started crying and repeating, "Scary man, scary man." I picked him up and got both kids upstairs to their playroom. Then I called their mum and told her what happened. She came home early, and when I explained what Sophie had said, her face went completely white. She took out her phone, pulled up a photo of a man, and asked, "Did he look like this?" I stared at the picture and felt my stomach drop. It was exactly how Sophie had described him, tall, wearing a black coat. I asked, "Who is that?" She said, "That's my father. He died 5 years ago, before Sophie was born." She told me there was no way Sophie could have seen any photos of him, because they had removed every picture from the house after he died. He'd been abusive, and the family didn't want any reminders of him. She gently asked Sophie to describe the man again. Sophie said, "He told me to tell Mommy that he's sorry, and he wishes he could take it back." Then she added, "He was crying." The mum started crying too, and told me her father had written her a letter before he died apologizing for everything. But she never read it. She'd thrown it away without opening it. Sophie said the man wanted Mommy to know he loved her, and he was sorry for hurting her. Then she said, "He's gone now. He left when you came home." I don't believe in ghosts, but I have no explanation for how Sophie described a man she'd never seen or even heard about. The family moved to a different house 6 months later,